Welcome to this new episode of Seed Talks. Today we have with us Wakanyi Hoffman. Hello, Wakanyi.
Hi.
Nice to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me.
You are more than welcome, and we are really grateful to have you in these interviews because I particularly have been attending to all your trainings these days, and there were many things I was taking mental notes that I wanted to ask you. So I'm glad I have the opportunity now. Mm-hmm. Before, let me introduce you our guest. Wakanyi is a researcher specializing in AI ethics, and especially particularly in the field of correct me if I'm wrong, indigenous intelligence systems applied to technology and AI in particular, right?
Yes.
And at the same time, Wakanyi has been giving conferences and talks all over the world in very well-known scenarios like the Davos, in the World Economic Forum at Davos, and also in the Dubai Tech Forum or Future Forum. I don't remember well there, but it was in a very particular place. And we will go later to there because one of the questions is related to that. And also in this occasion, she's a trainer at AI Compass, this training course that is being held in the Past Rural Co-Living by the Social Circle. And she also came to do the premiere of the first encounter of the Schumacher School Spain that is going to be started. It's going to start this year in Cantabria. So a lot of things, a lot of activities, and lots of topics to talk about. But I would like to start with something you mentioned this morning in a meeting related to maybe who you are today, how you feel today, how you feel the training and the overall atmosphere, and what would you like to bring to the group this morning. I remember you mentioned coherence. Mm-hmm. So I would like to hear you explain who are you today, and how is that linked to this need of this will of bringing coherence to the encounter.
Thank you so much for asking that question, and it's such a specific question which really helps to ground the conversation that we're having. So coherence for me, the reason why I spoke about coherence is every time you encounter new people, a new group of people, you're having a new group dynamic in which you have to find your place in that community. And of course, this is a very diverse community. It's actually, I think, the first time I've been with a group of students and lifelong learners, because I think that's what we have here today, who are also from various European countries. Mm-hmm. So meaning that they're all speaking different languages, they're coming from different cultures. If you walk into the room, you see Europe, but each one of them is a particular piece of the puzzle of that European identity. And of course, we have also religious backgrounds. We have different age groups. So for me, as a Kenyan, and as an African, and as someone who's been raised and trained from a different culture, I'm really quite sensitive to how people show up, given their different backgrounds. And so coherence for me is actually a cultural intelligence. It's like, how do we come together to truly be authentic, our authentic selves, and also be able to engage with others from different cultures in a way that makes sense for the group. And after this, we go and disperse and we go back to where we feel most comfortable. And it's the first time also, Andrés, that I feel that I am sitting in a room full of people that speak different languages. And I am sort of the only native English speaker, which is a very interesting place to be. So I feel like I'm also having to do the translation, what someone is saying and how it's coming from their heart, and what kind of translations are they having to make in their heads, because language plays a big role in how we communicate what we actually mean. Do we mean what we're saying, or do we need extra time to really distill our thinking? And so coherence for me is a question of what is the story that's sitting in everyone's head, and what's the story that we're all bringing together. And in the end, what is the collective intelligence that wants to emerge? And that's what I hope to bring, is to understand that collective intelligence in the room.
And that is more or less, that is more or less the base of the Ubuntu philosophy.
Absolutely.
That you are that you're trying to apply, first of all, to explain, to make it fully understandable for those who are not familiar with it, and then if I got it right, make it as a new base or as an alternative base to how we understand technology and how we understand this newly and easy and quickly fast growing technology that is AI.
That's right. I mean, AI as it stands right now, of course we know AI is not new, and I like to always ground my talk and conversations on AI on the historical fact that we are discovering AI as if it is new, but the actual machine learning has been around since the 1950s and earlier, since before any of us were here. So from that angle, that helps us all realize that what we are doing is building on a technology that already exists. And so along the way, decisions have been made by other humans before, right? So from an Ubuntu perspective, what decisions, what choices do we need to make now to ensure that the human adventure, the human authenticity remains intact as we interact with these machines and the new intelligences that are developing faster than we are evolving as human beings. So if you think of AI as something that has an evolution of its own, it has evolved faster than we can ever truly imagine. Those who created machine learning or the idea of artificial intelligence in the 1950s, if they were here today, this level of sophistication is far greater than what they had imagined in the 1950s. So we are now standing at the axis of something brand new that is going to significantly alter the way we interact as human beings. And the machine itself is going to continually mirror back to us who we are becoming. So it's that space of our human connection that I want to step in and be able to navigate, help people navigate, as if you're on the bridge. Help us navigate what it means to be human in the face of a technology that mirrors back who we say we are as human beings, but it is also learning much faster and evolving much faster than our own actual biological, physical, mental, spiritual evolution as human beings, which is always going to be much slower than the technology itself.
We can have here like 2 points of view or two attitudes towards this technology and how it is growing. One could be all this is happening to us while we still don't know what being human is. We don't have an answer to that, so it's too late because the machine, the digital soul in it, or the logic, the market logic that has created it, is going to change us forever. So it's like that would be the negative or the pessimistic view. But we can also make an optimistic approach. It's like this machine that is going to mimic many of the things we do is going to really help us, can really help us mirror ourselves and make us understand what is it and what is ours and what is naturally ours. So it's an opportunity really to. My question is it can it be or do you see it as an opportunity to deepen our knowledge of what being a human is?
So I like to liken AI evolution, or the current way that AI is being developed. It is a bit like how when we discovered electricity, which none of us can see electricity anymore, right? But electricity exists. Now we all know that we have to be careful around an electric current, right? If for example, I'm a mom, I have children, I would not allow my kids to touch an open electric circuit, right? That's dangerous. We had to get there where we had to put those guardrails, right? So AI to me is a bit like the new fire, or the second fire that we've discovered. And the question I sit with when I'm talking to people, whether it's children or philosophers in the room or very technical team, is who do we need to become? Who do I need to be as a human being in order to interact with this technology in a safe and responsible way? And like you said, it does have that duality, right? On the one hand, it really is an amazing tool. It's an amazing tool in the sense that there's so much we can do with it now. But it all depends on what we feed it, the data we feed it. So that's the risk, right? That's the danger of playing with fire, right? If you know that if you play with fire, you could get burned, or you could create a fire to keep people warm, right? So who do I need to be? What are those principles? What is that way of being? And it all comes down to this idea of care ethics. And care is quintessential to the development of Ubuntu, which means Ubuntu in itself means being and becoming more human together, which is on the one hand how I am becoming more and more human and how I'm becoming more human with others, right? Because we all depend on each other to grow in our humanity. So care in itself needs examples. The more caring technical team there is behind an AI system, the better the system will perform, right? It will be inevitably, it will mimic or it will be created in the image of its creator. So for me, that is where I come in with this concept of Ubuntu, that we have now this opportunity, right? If we have an intelligence that's mirroring back to us who we say we are as human beings, we now have to sit with this question: what does it mean to truly be human? What is this thing about us being human that helps us look after each other, that helps us flourish together? And if we can nail down what those ethical, principled ways of being human are across the board, then our machines will mimic to us who we really say we are. Otherwise, it could also mimic the dangerous and harmful ways that we treat each other. So now we are faced with the question of how on earth are we actually going to live with each other as human beings so that our tools can help us amplify the things that help us grow together as human beings.
And here is where I can somehow picture you in the plane before taking off one of these forums in a fancy airport, thinking that you act or you behave as a bridge between two worlds, let's say a world of ancient languages, community wisdom connected to these fast-growing market-based initiatives or companies. Mm-hmm. And I see a divide. I see two velocities, two speeds that are very difficult to harmonize. And I wonder whether you, what do you see in common? What parts of the fabric of those two worlds do you see that overlap enough to sew them and bring them together? What are these elements, and how can the people that see them, that see this union, how can then influence those who are creating or training these tools to observe these principles and not only grow with the easy laws or the assumed laws of the market? That was a very long question.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. It comes down to really basic principles of what it means to be human, to belong in a human community. Each one of us understands what it feels like to belong whether in a family, to belong to a culture, to belong to a nation state, to be a citizen. We've come up with language to define belonging. And so I think that is the starting point, and that is where my bridge is. How do we belong in this new world that we're creating? And who doesn't belong? Right? So looking at AI, for example, right now, on the one hand, as we said, it's a great tool, and on the other hand, it has the potential to create a lot of harm and to repeat past mistakes, because it could very much amplify the same biases, the same colonial mentality that created the world that we live in. However, when it comes down to it, we have to envision, we have to have this moral imagination of the kind of world that we want to live in and what kind of problems are we taking with us into the future. So if that is our starting point, what does true belonging mean for different people in different cultures, right? So if it's the people that are creating, that are inventing the technology, or that are funding the technology, in what world do they envision the rest of us coexisting with them? Right? So if you start to look at the problems that we have at the moment, and you look at the data, the inequalities, whether it is questions of democracy, political engagement is pretty low, while at the same time we can see this rise of authoritarianism, right? There's a reason for that. So there's a disengagement between the political class, if you want, or the political leaders and the rest of society. So if we're building a world in which we want to limit that divide so that we have less civic unrest, then we have to find a place to meet, more like that third space that we need to find ways to have a conversation about what it means to be human and what it means to belong, to have true belonging, where each person feels that they have a say, they're able to exercise their agency, their self-agency in the reality of the world in which the world that is being built for them or on behalf of them. So from a leadership perspective, if I'm sitting with a group of leaders, I will ask them the question about the future. I will ask them questions about what kind of future do they envision for themselves and for future generations, right? And if I'm sitting with a group of indigenous communities in northern Namibia, for example, with the San people or Native Americans in America, I will ask the question, what is your future thinking for your future generations? And then based on the information I gather from this group or that group, that's the starting point. And I can see clearly the pattern is the same. We're all thinking about future generations, but we're also looking at it from a particular culture or a particular way of thinking. But if we come down to it, we're looking at belonging together. The future that we envision still has human beings from across the board. It will not be a future led by Silicon Valley only, right? It will not be a future led by Chinese technology only. It will be a future that these technologies have been adapted across the board. And if someone feels left out, that is a friction that's going to create more problems in the future. And so I look at really concretely, what is this picture, the image that we have of a future, and how do we want, who is excluded and who is included, and how do we want to increase inclusion so that then we can limit the harm that is potentially going to come with these technologies.
And thinking of that third space that can bring these two worlds that share a vision together, what do the people that want to influence that area, what practical things can they start doing tomorrow? Thinking of something that is watching this video. What would you tell them in order, if I'm worried about the use of this tool that is actually amazing, and I want my people to be more conscious about it, or my policymakers, or my community. What will be like a 5-step or a 3-step handbook for them to be part of that change?
So the narrative, I think we're talking about a narrative shift here to begin with. So to begin with, I would say we need to move away from the scenarios of doom and gloom, or the scenario of abundance. So this duality of AI, we know that it exists, right? It can be a great tool. And if you go with just that scenario, then you're amplifying a narrative of how great AI is and completely avoiding the fact that there are limitations and there are possible harms. If you go with the doom scenario, then you're amplifying the story of an existential threat. And of course, we can see that already is creating a lot of anxiety in people, especially if your job is at the risk of this AI replacement, for example, right? So if you are in this position, like we have the students we have currently here in this program, and you're thinking about being that community leader, that bridge between the technology and the user, the end user, what you are right now is someone who can translate that duality, right? Because that duality is what exists as a narrative out there. So there are those who are pro-AI and there are those who are against AI. But none of these scenarios are actually going to be the reality in the future. The reality is somewhere in the middle. So for those of us who have this advantage or the privilege of coming to such a gathering and being able to sit down and have this conversation, we need to create a different narrative around agency. So the first rule of thumb, I would say, is we need to amplify the narrative of at the end of the day, 8 billion people are shaping this technology, with our data, with the conversations that we have, with all of our content that we have put out there. How responsible do we need to now become so that we're able to put out the reality of who we are? And then the second thing, I would say the second step is to empower people in our communities to learn and understand how AI actually works, right? Which goes back to my first point. How does AI work? You put a prompt in there. What is the quality of that prompt? That prompt enables AI to produce a response based on what you asked. So that's your agency right there. So again, always returning this power to the end user, so that people can stop focusing too much on the doom and gloom scenario or the abundance scenario, and actually be able to understand that I actually have I have agency. I have power over how I can use this technology. And so the third point is that we need to have spaces of conversations around the fear that people have for AI. And that is something we can do. So everyone here, I hope that will go back home feeling empowered to be able to talk about self-agency and communal agency. There's a lot of talk about building small AI agents or training AI models that are AI assistants. What does that mean? That means I have the power to shape this AI in the way that suits me best and suits my community best and suits the project that I want to do best. And in that discussion, you might find out that you don't actually need to use any AI tool for what you want to do. And that's another way of understanding that there is power in saying no. There is power in saying, I don't need this technology. So those are the three steps that I would go with.
There are in your talk the other day, you were very you insisted a couple of times, you highlighted a couple of times the importance of language in this empowerment, in this agency. How can what's the weight, the way AIs are trained? How is that related with the language they are trained in?
So we call them large language models, and there's a reason why AI was trained, the current AI systems that we have are trained as large language models. They could have trained them on anything, right? There was a science fiction model where they could have used it, gamification, for example, right? And not use so much of the language. But language is our oldest tool, right? Human beings developed language so we could communicate, so we could understand each other, and possibly so we could ask for help from each other. Because the more information you have, the better you're capable of making a good decision. However, these large language models primarily are trained on data that is English to begin with, right? At the end of the day, it's translating everything from an English perspective. So already there's an inherent bias. So I believe that the future of AI is going to have to be smaller models that are trained on small data from particular languages. So natural language speakers are going to become even more of value when we are interacting with AI. And so this is also an opportunity to realize that language is shaping our interactions. English language is shaping the way that we interact with AI. Ultimately, it's interpreting everything from a logic of the English language, right? So you as a Spanish speaker, or me as a Swahili speaker, or somebody else who speaks Italian or Polish or Greek or whatever, we need to now really pay attention to the way that our language informs decisions that we make, and use our languages to actually engage with AI systems, and then encourage ourselves to keep creating spaces in which language can become more sophisticated, other languages can become more sophisticated. Otherwise, we risk flattening every language, every culture into some sort of new culture that is only generated through the English language, which doesn't also serve natural language English speakers to begin with.
Mm-hmm. Well, how do you envision? One of the things, one of my takeaways of this training was yesterday, or a couple of days ago. You and Angela, the other trainer, kind of proposed the trainees a vision, an alternative vision of AI as an agent of good, almost as a digital spirit, let's say, that is taking care of all of us in a way we don't doubt the intentions, because it's controlled by the control is distributed and it's agreed by the community that the use of that tool is benefiting the majority, if not everybody. That really impacted the way I tended to use to understand AI, and it really changed it, because for me before it was, okay, this is going to be a tool handed by a few people that it's super powerful, but the market is going to define its use. And as we are now, this is too powerful to be spread all over. But since yesterday, I started to understand it as just this kind of guardian angel. It can be a guardian angel for communities. What uses do you envision, or do you think this benevolent or good nature, good intended AI can have in a community? Can you share some examples?
So I think first of all, it can also it can play the role of mediating conversations within communities, really creating that sense of coherence, right? So if you are, like we did a sampling here where we had a questionnaire, right? A set of questions that we gave all the participants to respond to, questions related to how they respond to, they define agency, and how they see agency being a part and parcel of how they interact with AI, and how you can increase agency, and where does agency come from, and what is collective agency? How do we increase collective agency? These are some of the questions that we gave them. Now imagine taking all of that data and running it through an AI system that has a guardrail of, let's say, Ubuntu principles, or whatever principles you've put in the back end that filters the response that you get in the end. So through that system, then you have the collective intelligence of all of what was harvested in those questionnaires would then be filtered through these really wonderful principles of Ubuntu. And in the end, you have a document that tells us, that distills the wisdom in the room and gives us a sense of what we are talking about and whether we agree. And then you take that document and you now iterate, you work with each other, right? You go back into the circle and say, is this what we were talking about? Does this represent all of our thinking? Because oftentimes, through our own best intentions, we can have a conversation and we can have an agreement on something, and we think we have agreed, but then you go off and you do something different, because again, human beings, we tend to get distracted, or we have errors that we make. That's human fallacy, right? However, if you can always come back to this space where you run your thoughts and ideas that you already shared in an analog way, you run them again through that AI system that has already been built with the values that you share in common, the basic foundation of what you want to see in the end. Then that document is something that you can agree on. So it's a bit like it helps us create the harness and reinforce the behavior that we want to see, whether it's in a group, a community, or a school, for example, or a community health services, or it could be a university, it could be a village like we are in here today. So that becomes the agreement that everyone can go back to, that isn't written by a few people. It is actually collective intelligence that has now been distilled into collective wisdom by something other than any one of us. So no one is to blame, and no one is a sole author of the thing that we agree on. I think that's one way that AI can really help mitigate harm.
So it's a tool for understanding in the end.
For interpreting and bridging ideas and bridging the way in which we relate to each other. So it's a tool for helping us improve the conditions for better relating. Because in the past what we have had is we've had systems where laws are made, for example, or community agreements are made. So for example, if you want to have an AI system that helps us understand the needs of a community, right? So maybe you're health workers. You are a set of health workers and you're working with a particular community that you don't know much about. Once you do the interviews and discover the needs of that community, you can run those responses through an AI system that has in the back end embedded the principles, let's say it's indigenous protocols or let's say it's Ubuntu protocols, or any other kinds of protocols that that community already agrees on, basic principles of how their values, right? So you run their responses of what they need for a particular project through that filter, and then what you get in the end is their collective needs, right? And then you bring it back to the community and ask them, does this seem to be what you need? Rather than assuming that just because I read everything that everyone said is what was needed, that's definitely what it is. So it removes my interpretation, my biased interpretation of what other people might need, and actually puts me in the back end as a facilitator for this process to emerge from the community itself. So AI is a great tool for interpreting things, nuances, things that you may not have yourself thought about, because it reads patterns, right? It is based on language. It reads the pattern of language. It reads the pattern of what is emerging, the themes that are emerging. On your own, as a human being, your brain is not wired to do that meta modeling of the data that you've been given by a large group of people. You might be able to do that with a friend, but you might not necessarily be able to understand the needs of 100 people, let alone 1,000 people or 10,000 people in one community. But with AI, you can use that data to create a meta model of what the actual needs, what was being said, and distill it into specifications that then you can help go back to the community and ask them, is this really what you need? And that's really helpful to someone who's trying to do particularly work in the non-profit work, for example.
It's a super interesting idea, because it moves the focus from the individual amplification that normally we get from technology to collective or community amplification that in a way lightens the weight the individual is carrying with these capabilities that they will have thanks to technology, and distributes the weight throughout the community, and so helps the common good. So it's a super interesting idea.
I mean, I have another example. Imagine if you're a doctor, how wonderful it is for a doctor right now. Maybe you're a doctor who's working in a village, or you are a doctor like Doctors Without Borders, right? And doctors who go into crisis zones, right? They might not be the doctors from that particular part of the world, right? And you're in a situation where there's a crisis. If you have the information, the medical information for all the patients, you might not on your own be able to have a clear assessment. It's not because you're not a good doctor, but it's because you don't have the experience of living in a particular village or a particular location, right? That information, run it through an AI system and give it the specifications of who the patient is, what your background is, what your biases are, what is your knowledge, what you do know and what you do not know, and give the specifications of the cultural background of your patients, or where they're coming from, their gender, and all of this. The AI will be able to read, to crawl the data that it's been trained on to find enough helpful information. Of course, the prompt that you give really matters, right? So you have to be very honest about that, right? But in the end, you get a different response that you on your own might not have been able to come up with. And now here you are, you're able to save a number of lives using a tool that gives you the right information, that is timely, and that is actually time sensitive, because you're dealing with a sensitive situation like a medical crisis.
Definitely. I mean, I can really see it as a council of wise people aiding or giving help to someone that has come to a particular mission. So it's a really inspiring vision of the use. But I guess we are getting too much time of you. I'm sure you have to come back to the training. I would like to ask you one last question regarding and trying to be a little bit more practical or stepping in the day of today. You know, where we all are using AI for different purposes, and we would like them to be more sophisticated than they normally are. I mean, we are becoming lazy, many of us, and we have seen this in this training. Many people were asking you, is it okay? Is it sustainable if I ask ChatGPT what's the capital of Slovenia? It's like, well, there are other ways to guess that. And before you mentioned that we have the power to say no to AI. Yeah. So I would like to know what kind of use of the AI models and solutions we have today an expert like you does in her everyday life.
The question I asked, which was the main question that everyone who's using AI needs to ask themselves, from the youngest, from a 5-year-old all the way to a 90-year-old, the question you need to ask yourself is, what problem am I trying to solve? What problem in the world am I trying to solve, right? And that word world could mean your own little world, right? It could be the 5-year-old that wants to know what's 2 plus 2. Right? Do they need to go to AI and ask 2 plus 2? They can ask their dad or their mom or the teacher or their friend even, right? So we need to have that be the fundamental question that's the prompt before the prompt. What question am I trying to, what problem am I trying to solve in the world? And this is a way to engage with AI ethically and responsibly, because we must not forget that AI technology uses a lot of energy and uses a lot of natural resources, right? And this is a problem that's not yet been solved. We do not yet know what the environmental harm is going to be in the long run. And this is something really important for all of us to understand. So before you go into AI, think about the real problem that you're trying to solve. And if there's any other way, any other tool, because AI is not a multi-purpose tool. It's not the only tool. It's one tool that's now added in our toolbox as human beings, because we love creating tools as humanity. Every generation creates another tool, a better tool, and another better tool. But before we use these tools, we must now ask ourselves, what problem am I trying to solve? And do I have any other way of solving it that does not involve artificial intelligence? If the answer is AI is the best that can help me solve this problem, because this is a matter of life and death, for example, if it's a doctor using it for a specific research question, or it could be any other way. Maybe it's directions that you're completely lost and you definitely need to use AI for that, some kind of navigation. That's a different story from someone who's simply asking, what's the capital city of Portugal? Maybe you can find that answer elsewhere, through a friend, through an analog way. We must not default to AI as the only tool now that is supposed to solve all the problems in the world, because it's not. Yeah. And it's not the last tool that we will create.
Yeah. It's like when you have a hammer, everything is a nail, right?
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
So you better change the range of tools at your hand.
Yes.
I like very much the idea of the prompt before the prompt. Think of why you're prompting that into your mind. Mm-hmm. So thank you very much, Wakanyi. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Andrés. It's been great.
Yeah. And I hope, to see you around more times in this kind of encounters. Mm-hmm. And thank you to all of you for this time, and I hope you enjoyed and learned a little bit more about how can we use AI in a different way that helps everybody.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.